Imagine your early life was a list of successes. You did well at school, you got a scholarship, played basketball, you performed very well at that. You also did some careers that you really enjoyed, that you did well at. And then you get cancer, and that cancer lasts for over 10 years and continues on and results in you having your leg amputated and continuing to struggle and to survive with that. How do you stay upbeat? How do you stay motivated? How do you continue to inspire others? This is the journey of Terry Tucker. Listen to how he's found his purpose and to stay upbeat in spite of all that life has thrown at him.
Welcome to Share.Care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.Care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.Care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Share.Care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. Now today, it's my great pleasure to welcome Terry Tucker. Terry has combined his 10-year battle with cancer, athletic coaching, and law enforcement background as a foundation for his speaking topics, How to Live Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Purpose, and The Fourth Truths to Learning a Resilient Life. He has also published the book, Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Learning Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. Welcome, Terry.
Damian, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
No, it's a great pleasure to have you here, Terry. And can we just jump into the Wayback Machine, that DeLorean, time machine, and go back, to some of your background and what has led you to doing what you're doing now, some of the challenges that you've overcome.
Sure. So I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, one of the larger cities in the United States. I'm the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall, and I actually went to college on a basketball scholarship despite having 3 knee surgeries when I was in high school. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available.
I can relate to that. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm of that generation.
To help people find employment. And I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. So, I was all set to make my mark on the world with my newly obtained business administration degree. And I look back now and realize how little I knew about business just because I had a degree. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, the fast food chain, in their marketing department. Unfortunately, I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. Professionally, as I said, started out in marketing at Wendy's, became a hospital administrator, and then made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of my role in law enforcement was I was a SWAT team hostage negotiator. When my law enforcement career was over, I started a school security consulting business. I coached girls' high school basketball, became an author in 2020. But for the last 10, almost 11 years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. And then I guess just finally to round it out, my wife and I have been married for almost 30 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. and is an officer in the new branch of the military here in the U.S., the Space Force.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there.
See,
What
that's what
was
happens when you're old. You have a
yeah,
lot of things happen to you.
exactly. So let's go back to when you started in marketing. Was that a choice that you wanted to work in marketing? What was the motivation for doing that? Was it
There wasn't. So let me give you the backstory. The backstory sort of makes my resume make a little bit more sense. My grandfather was a Chicago police officer from
yeah.
1924 to 1954, and he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But
He
when I
shot, did
expressed
he shoot himself, or was it?
no, he was taking a homicide, a murder suspect, a guy who'd robbed a bank and shot and killed a teller back to the lockup.
Yeah.
And this was 1933. This will give you an idea how long ago this was.
Wow.
And there were reporters at the end of the hallway, and the individual asked my grandfather for his comb to comb his hair. And when my grandfather reached in for his comb, the butt of his gun, he had a shoulder holster on, came out. The guy grabbed it. They wrestled around. The gun went off, shot my grandfather in the ankle.
Wow.
But there were a bunch of other officers around, so they were able to get control of it.
Yeah.
But when I expressed, an interest of going into law enforcement, my father was like, absolutely not. You're going to go to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after.
Yeah.
But that's what my father wanted me to do because he remembered the stories. My dad was an infant at the time, but he remembered the stories that my grandmother told of that knock on the door of, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us. Your husband's been shot. And let's face it, trauma medicine in 1933 is a whole lot different than trauma medicine in 2023. So that was, again, my dad was dying of cancer when I graduated from college. So I had a choice. I could have said, sorry, Dad, I'm going to go blaze my own trail and do my own thing. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So that's why my first two jobs were in business. And then I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited till my father passed away and followed my own dreams of becoming a police officer.
How was that from a discipline perspective, from your side of things, or an emotional perspective? Obviously, there's a love for your dad, and there's that wanting to do that. But I'm taking it at that time you were wrestling with, your own purpose and your own need, and you were balancing that. How did you do that, and how did you stay focused on, enjoying your life while at the same time knowing that you weren't doing what you really wanted to do?
Yeah, it was 3.5 years of really not enjoying my life. You just graduate from college, you're all set to make your mark, and then you have to be at home. And literally, I worked and I was at home. I would get up in the morning, get dressed, go to work, come home at noon, come home at lunchtime, take my father to work, then go back to my job, and then at 5 o'clock, go and get my father and bring him home and, put him to bed. And so I didn't really have a social life. I really didn't date or anything like that. But one thing my parents taught, I think my brothers and I, was the importance of family, the importance of caring for each other, of loving each other, of supporting each other. So there was no doubt. There was at no time did I ever say to myself, well, you know what, the heck with my parents, I'm going to go do my own thing. It was my mom needed me. I mean, I can't even imagine my mother. Her mother was dying in one room and her husband was dying in the other room. And, to have to go through that, she needed all the help and support she could get. And so there was no doubt that I was going to, if it would have taken 30 years, I would have done that because my parents gave so much to my brothers and I, it was our time to give back to them as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. In that, so because what I want to do, what I've heard from there with what you're saying is, if we could take, and we're going to jump way ahead here now, so our Wayback Machine is going all over the place, but because what I'm hearing is that from you were really caring about your family, and then you wanted to look after your family, which is no doubt. I would imagine you could have done that regardless of which career you chose. But let's but your dad said, don't join the police force, don't want to do that. And then you did that, and then you went into an environment that you weren't happy at, but you were obviously feeling fulfilled in looking after your parents, which I completely understand that. Let's step forward to the Terry today with the work that you do. If you were that Terry now, because I'm sure you wouldn't have said, as a teenager, yeah, we go heck with your parents, and because I did the same thing and went off. But now, as a mature person, if you were to take those skills back, I would imagine you would deal with that slightly differently. You wouldn't be going to heck with your parents, but also too, you might approach it differently from the perspective of their expectations and your expectations. Would there be anything different if you could take you back now with that knowledge and have that chat with your father?
No, I family is so important to me and so ingrained that I guess I always knew in the back of my mind that I would get to where I needed to be eventually.
Right. Okay.
But it was my parents were, I'm not the classic case where my dad was an alcoholic and he beat it was just the opposite. We had a great family. And, my parents used to do what I call divide and conquer parenting, because I've got 3 brothers. We were all athletes. We were all, playing different sports. So it would be like, Terry's got a game, today at this time, dad's going to that. Well, Larry's got practice at the same time. And so mom's going to that. So my parents were always going in a million different directions, but they were doing it for us. They were doing it to make us better and to do the things that we enjoyed. And so when it came time to sort of reverse the roles, now I have to be the parent. Now I have to be the one caring for you. There was, like I said, if it would have taken me 30 years to do that, I would have spent 30 years doing it, because it was just that important to me. And I hope I pass that on, to our daughter as well. I believe we have. My wife and I have as well.
I love that. From that perspective, because we talked about in the intro, it's in today's world, it certainly is in your own selfish best interest to others. Can you describe the benefits that you feel you got from doing that, from making that decision, saying, okay, I'm going to look after my parents? Obviously, you had a recognition of all the things that they'd given you. But even then, you've gone, okay, well, I'm going to sacrifice, what I need to do that. What did you get out of that? What was your benefit for that?
Just the self-satisfaction that I was needed, and I was caring for somebody who had cared for me for so much of my life, who had fostered, everything I did, whether it was supporting me in athletics or academics or whatever it is. I remember there was one night where my father, he was on chemotherapy and he was losing his hair, and he had taken a shower, and I was drying his hair with a hair dryer, what little hair he had left. And he stuck out his hand like he wanted to shake hands with me. And I kind of looked at him like, what are you doing? And he kept the hand there. So I shook hands with him, and in the palm of his hand was $100 bill. And I looked at him like, what is this for? And he was like, that's for, and he was very emotional. He's like, that's for taking care of me. And I really kind of got incensed. I was mad. I took the $100, and he had a pajama top on, and it had a pocket in it, and I put it back in his pocket. I said, don't ever do that to me again. I said, you're making me feel like a prostitute. Everything you and mom had done for me and for my brothers, and now it's my turn to do it for you. Well, how dare you pay me? I didn't need the money. I had my own, I was working and all that. I had my own job. So it wasn't like I needed the money, but it was just, I just felt like, why are you paying me? I didn't pay you as a kid. I didn't get an allowance and say, here, dad, thanks for giving me breakfast this morning. No, that's what family's about. It's about caring for each other and loving each other and supporting each other. It's not about what are you going to give me in exchange for my love, care, and support.
Yeah, because I can imagine that when they were parenting you, they weren't expecting anything in return. They were just doing it because they wanted to do that. So from that perspective, is it, from that giving side of things, was it really about that satisfaction of helping someone else? And that's what worked really well for you to continue to do that, even though you weren't doing the career you wanted, but you felt that satisfaction.
I did. And, yes, I was not in the career I wanted, but I was in a career and I was learning and I was meeting new people and I was growing as a person, which I think ultimately helped me when I became a police officer. I was able to talk to all kinds of different people, from, administrative support staff to, the owner of the company and things like that. So I grew as a person as well through my job. I wasn't passionate about it. It wasn't like I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and, and go to the office. That was not the case. But I worked with good people and I learned things. And, I guess that would be one piece of advice I would give. If you're in a situation where maybe you're not happy, what can you learn? I mean, it's incumbent upon you to do the best you can, even though you may not be in a situation where, it's ideal for you. But learn what you can and then use that and take it to the next position that you have.
Is that a focus thing? Because there's research that shows, obviously we know dopamine is what makes us feel happy. And there's research that shows, well, it's dopamine and serotonin, but from the dopamine side of things, research shows that if we think happy, that actually starts the production of dopamine in our body, so we can actually make ourselves be happy just purely by thinking about it, because that chemical reaction happens as soon as we start to think that. When you think about that time within the work that you're doing, because as you said, you found some satisfaction in doing the work that you did, do you think that applied as well from your side of things, where good days that you might have had in a job that you really, probably it wasn't your purpose, but you thought happy, therefore that production of dopamine happened and you actually enjoyed your day? Because I'm imagining the way you're talking about it doesn't sound like every day was a drag for you, even though it wasn't your purpose. It sounds like you got a lot of satisfaction out of it. Is that true?
It is true. I met people, from those jobs that now 40 years later, I still stay in contact with and that. Mm-hmm. So I made friends. I made people that, are still today, 40 years later, important in my life. And yes, I think that's absolutely true. I always use the basketball analogy with people that, if I took a basketball and went out in the court and I practiced shooting that basketball, there would be a certain part of my brain that would light up that I was making those connections. Well, you're right. That same thing happens when I would think about taking that basketball and going out on that court and shooting that basket. That same part of my brain is going to light up, which kind of tells me, be very careful how you talk to yourself. Be very careful with the thoughts that you put in your brain, because, let's face it, we all become what we think.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And that's where I was running, because I had a similar experience, or a number of times. But I remember one experience where I was working at a company doing a very mundane job of sorting out spreadsheets. You couldn't get, that's kind of like accounting on steroids. You couldn't get more boring. And I went, okay, how am I going to make this fun? How can I enjoy that? And I was thinking about that. And so I found a way to actually enjoy and make it a challenge, make it a game. And we know video games that are made addictive by giving us these little challenges that we, are fun, these little accomplishments and little rewards along the way. So as I was doing it, I would reward I didn't realize I was doing it at the time. Now that I've looked back at it, I've gone, I really enjoyed this. And I spent weeks going through millions of line items and spreadsheets and stuff like that. It was just mind-numbingly boring if you approached it that way. And I was thinking about that from that perspective of, okay, I actually made that fun. And as you say, as you think, so that's what you become. And I remember Wayne Dyer talked about, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. And I was taking that a step further, wondering, okay, what is the secret to happiness? And I did a search on all quotes and I couldn't find anything. And then I just popped into my head from what Wayne Dyer had said, was that the secret to happiness is to be happy, because as soon as you're happy, you're producing that dopamine. With that thinking in my mindset, then I had this revelation that it probably wasn't this new thing. And I was remembering this film that was made in 1937, the first animated feature-length film, Snow White. And what do they sing in that show? Whistle while you work. Yeah. And I was like, Talk about that, because listening to you talk about this, you were learning marketing, which I'm sure had come in helpful. Talk about that experience of learning marketing, because again, not your passion, but it sounds like that you found ways to make that enjoyable and fun.
I did, and I guess I have to go back a little bit. When I was in college, one summer I worked for a large company that made presses that punched out auto parts, hoods and doors and things like that. And I would ride to work with these two men, these two older guys. I was like 20 years old, and these guys were getting ready to retire. And I remember one guy's job was literally, he was in shipping and receiving. Packages or boxes would come in because a lot of times the presses would break and they would need a new part or something like that. So a box would come in. He would cut the box open, take out the shipping manifest, and it would say, one widget. And he'd open the box, one widget. And he'd close it up and send it up. And he did that 8 hours a day. And I was like, I will blow my brains out if I would have to do something like that. I thought, oh my God, but this guy, what I found interesting and what I took from that was, yes, that's his work. That's what he does for this company. But he was, this was in Chicago, so he was a big Chicago White Sox baseball fan. And he would talk about that. And his daughter was getting married. So yes, this is what I do for a living, but I've got all these other things going on in my life that make me happy, that make me fulfilled, that I'm interested in. And so he was an incredibly happy guy, but I'm just watching him every day and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'd lose my mind if I had to do this, every single day. But that's what his job was. So, marketing for me was, I'd taken marketing classes. I have a business administration degree and stuff like that. But to actually see it at work, to see, I remember I started out in field marketing, and then I eventually moved to new products marketing. And I remember, and I talk about this in my book. I tell this story. We looked at different products to put into the stores, to put into the restaurants. And one of the things we looked at was a beef nugget. It was just like a chicken nugget, but it was a beef nugget. And it didn't. Yeah, exactly. That
ribs, yeah. Beef nugget, probably not.
It tasted great. It really did. If you didn't look at it, it was like, man, this tastes really good. But if you looked at it, you're like,
it looks like something else.
Exactly. And that was the problem of it. The aesthetic appeal of it was not good. But there was a director within the department who's like, you know what? We need to put this in the stores. We need to at least try it within the stores. We need to run a test. Now, we were a big company at the time. We were a Fortune 100 company. And so it was like everything that was involved, all the money that was involved, even if we took one city and just rolled it out in all the restaurants in that city, you've got menu boards, you've got product to buy, you've got how do we cook it, you got training, you've got, a key on the register to make it. You had all these things that you had to do. And the vice president was like, no, we're not doing it. And he and the director went back and forth. And finally, the vice president was like, well, you better be right. Go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
And so he did. And we did. And we did it in a test market, and it failed miserably. It was terrible. And so we all get together, for the debrief meeting when it's over, and we're expecting this director to be fired. It was like, this guy's out the door. No way. He stood up to the VP. Well, the vice president came in and he was like, we're all ready. We're kind of like, oh, here it comes. He's going to get it. And the vice president was like, you stood up to me. I told you I didn't want to do it. I told you why, but you believed in your heart that this was the right thing for us to do. He's like, I want more people like that. I want more people. We were all like, what? Because the dynamics, the politics that go on in a big organization. And so we were all like, this is amazing. This guy is basically being praised for failing. And that's exactly what he did. But it taught me the importance of standing up for what you believe in. And it also taught me the importance that failure is not necessarily making you a loser. You're only a loser if you don't learn something from it.
Yeah, definitely. That was one of the things you highlighted there. I think the character trait of persistence, because obviously that director had a lot of persistence to make it, not only to make his case, but to actually get the case across. because the VP agreed to it eventually and said, let's go and do that. How do you develop that? How does someone develop that kind of resilience?
I think you have to believe in yourself. I mean, things come at us and we're like, this is the right thing to do. But then outside forces come into play. Now somebody's saying, yeah, it might be a good idea. Yeah, it might even be successful. But you know what? The VP doesn't want to do it. So don't rock the boat. Don't go down that road just for your own, your own sanity and your own well-being and stuff like that. But people who are confident, people who believe in who know what they believe in, are the kind of people that I want to be around, because those people bring you along. Those people bring you up. Good people, strong people, smart people. Those are the people I want to be associated with, because they're going to make me better. They're going to make me stronger. They're going to make me smarter. And this was one of those guys. And he just had some, I don't know, charisma is not really the word, but he just had a strength of character that was like, I believe in this and I'm going to try to make the case. And I'm good if the VP tells me, it's his decision. But in all honesty, I think he just wore the vice president down. I think he was, he said it enough times that the vice president, like, yeah, fine, just go do it, but you better be right, kind of thing. And he was confident enough in his ability to be able to say, you know what, even if I fail, we're going to learn something from this test.
Yeah. What I'm taking from that, because you say confidence, be confident. I'm going to link that back to what we were talking about with being happy as well, because you don't go, and so I really believe now that the secret to happiness is to be happy. You think happy, you'll produce dopamine in your body. That's we know that happens. So it's not a case of, and we talk about that experience of, you mentioned about the guy that was working, unpacking or checking the what was in the box was what was said was in the box. But you said he was happy with what he was doing. And part of the reason I wanted to labor on that point too was sometimes we find ourselves in situations where it might not be our purpose, but if we go there, all skullduggery and droga and this sucks and my life sucks and all that kind of thing, people are going to pick up on that and it's going to be hard to move out of that. Whereas if you find that, I think, I'm going to reference another movie here, that spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down from Mary Poppins, where she talked about
Love that.
In every job, there's an element of fun, was the words that she used. If we find that in the job, now it might not be our passion, similar to what you did with the marketing. It wasn't your passion, but you found ways to make it fun. Then people pick up on that and move forward. But I also want to come back to that principle of, because you don't go to a store and find happiness on a shelf. It's not a noun. It's a verb. It's a way of doing things. Similar to confidence, I think we misconstrue that confidence is a thing, that it's something that we have. But if we really look at it, confidence is a verb. It's something that we do. So how do we explain to people, how would you explain to people that to be confident is not something you just get? You don't get it. It's a behavior. How would you describe that to people?
I would say it's a choice. I mean, you have the choice to be happy or you have the choice to be miserable. There's an individual here by the name of Ed Milet, who's an entrepreneur, who's a former college baseball player. And he talks about the 4 types of people in the world. And he said the first group of people are the unmotivated people. And he said that's the vast majority of people in the world. They're just unmotivated. They're just kind of, going through life. They're nothing's lighting their fire. Nothing's real exciting. And he said then the next group are the motivated people. And that's a pretty simple sort of carrot and stick. If you do this, you will get that. And then he talks about the last two groups. He said that the third group are the inspirational people. Inspirational coming from in spirit. So you move people with your energy, with the way you conduct your life. And then the last group are the aspirational people, which are people want to be like you. So if you think about it, and I, when I first heard that, I'm like, okay, that's a good way of looking at it. Is it true? But I think it is. So many people live what I call a casual life. And as a result, their goals, their dreams, their ambitions become a casualty of sort of that unplanned living. So, I mean, you have a choice every day when you get up. You can get up and say, you know what? Today's going to suck. It's going to be a terrible day. I'm not going to get, and all you're doing is perpetuating that. You're hardwiring your brain. You say that every day. You're eventually going to get to a point where you're a miserable person because you can't see any value in people, in the interactions. And I don't care who you are. I love people. I hate crowds, but I love people.
I relate to that. I hate lines.
Exactly. But I there's nobody that I've met that I can't learn from something from. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a janitor. I don't care if you drive a bus. I don't care if you're a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I can learn something from you. So why can't you decide? Why can't you make a choice every day when you get up? Yeah, my dad's dying of cancer. I'm in a job I don't like, but I have a choice to say, I'm going to learn something today. Today's going to be a good day. I don't know what it's going to be, but I can make a choice to say today's going to be a good day or today's not going to be a good day. It's my decision. It's my choice on how I want to approach it.
Yeah, I love that it is your choice. And that's something that I've made a switch some time ago with asking people, because you used to ask, and you've probably had this experience where you ask people, what do you want? And you kind of get this funny look about, oh, I don't know what I want. And then I changed the question to, what do you choose? And all of a sudden I saw light bulbs go off in the back of their eyeballs where they're going, hang on a minute, I've got a choice. And I wonder, when you were talking about that before, because you mentioned, people living a casual life, they're going through unmotivated, and there's a large proportion of that. I wonder how much of that is because they're not aware that they have a choice. Because we're taught beliefs, and it's like, oh, this is your place, this is what you can do. How much of that do you think might be linked to that, and people becoming aware that actually they can choose, that they can take that step, that you can earn money pretty much doing anything that you want in today's world, certainly in our society?
Absolutely. I have a classic example of that. I was a girls' high school basketball coach at a Jewish school. Now, I can't tell you how many of these kids, these young ladies, had it already indoctrinated into them that, you're going to get out and you're going to go to college and then you're going to come back and you're going to get married to a nice Jewish boy and you're going to raise nice Jewish kids and that's going to be your life. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want to do with your life, absolutely. But what drove me crazy, and really I could have cared less, about the basketball part of it. What I wanted to instill in these young ladies is you can do or be anything you want. Now, I got them for 2 hours after school. They go home and spend, the rest of the time with their families and stuff like that. So it's very hard to undoctrinate those people into basically, yeah, you can do this, but I don't want you to do that. As your mother, as your father, I'm telling you that this is what you're going to do. And it's just like my father not wanting me to go into law enforcement. There's a lot of people out there that, have a father figure or, somebody that's raising them, a caregiver that they love, they care about, that they want their opinion. And those people are telling them things that maybe are not in their best interest for whatever reason. It's not that they don't love them, but it's like, set the bar low. Set the bar low. It's okay. I mean, our own daughter, my wife and I, we used to always make her do things she was uncomfortable doing. We would always set the bar high and she would always obtain it. And so we got to a point where we finally figured that out. It was like, no, don't set the bar down here. Yeah, you're smart. You're going to get that bar. Set the bar up here where you have to reach, where you have to stretch to get something from your life. And then you realize, oh my gosh, I am capable of so much more than all these people are telling me I can do. Again, whatever you want to do, that's fine, but don't limit yourself because somebody else put that limit on you.
That's really interesting that you mentioned that about limiting yourself and following through with that, setting the bar high. And I believe, my belief is that a lot of times that's done with good intentions.
Yes.
It's to create a safety net, to show, okay, look, don't risk that. And I wonder too how much society has moved forward, where there is a lot less risks than there was even 20 or 30 years ago. You can step out and do different things. People are more accepting. We certainly, as we're moving towards a more egalitarian society, we're more accepting of differences, and not only accepting of them, but we're actually learning from those differences. And I wonder too, as we look at it, I remember reading a study where they looked at high achievers, such as, they did a massive study and included people like Steven Spielberg, all these people that really, really excelled. And what they were looking for was the common factor. What was the common factor that they had between them? I think they got to about 280, and they hadn't, different factors. They hadn't found anything common between these people. And then they finally got to one which actually was across the board, which was the parent, usually the parent of the opposite sex, had an unquestioning belief in the child's ability, which meant that, if the child at a young age, so if the child at, say, somewhere between 3 and 5 said they want to be an astronaut, they would have said, you're going to be the best astronaut ever. You're going to be amazing. You're going to just flourish. You're going to do that. And it wasn't a question of whether the child was going to be an astronaut or not. It was teaching them that they can accomplish, teaching them to have confidence in their ability, that they can choose. And that's where coming back to that confidence question, I know this is a long explanation, but coming back to that confidence question, is it a case of, if you haven't had that experience, it's simply a matter of telling yourself, hey, I can do whatever it is that I choose to do?
I think I want to say it is that simple. If you haven't had that nurturing, if you haven't had that, go out there and fail because, when you're young, because mom and dad are here, or, your caregiver is here and will be there to pick you up and support you and, and brush you off. But if you haven't had that, and I think a lot of people haven't had that, a lot of people just kind of muddle through life. And I've always wanted my life, at least, and again, I can only speak for myself, but I want my life to be shaped by the decisions that I made, not by the ones that I didn't or the ones that somebody else made for me. So even now, as I'm battling cancer, I've seen people that have just totally turned their entire life over to, a doctor, somebody with initials after their name. It's like, okay, I've got cancer now. You live my life. You tell me what to do. And I'm not like that. I'm sure my doctor wishes I was, because there are times I'm sure he'd like to hit me over the head with a 2x4. It's like, just shut up. You don't know what you're talking. I know I don't know what am I talking about, but educate me. Help me to learn about my disease. Help me to understand why you want to do this as opposed to that. And I read, I educate myself, and I go to people and I'm like, hey, I want to try this therapy. Does that make sense? Well, no, it doesn't. And here's why. And if you can explain that to me, then okay, fine, I won't do it. But if you can't explain it to me, then we got a problem. You're gonna have to give me a better reason than just because I said so. So I think confidence, you can give yourself confidence. And I think it starts with, let's face it, when I started playing basketball, I had 2 left feet. I was totally uncoordinated. I was terrible at the game. I could have given up. I could have said, you know what, I'm not good at this, so I'm going to quit. But for some reason, I kept doing it. It just felt like, well, if I can't do it today, maybe I can do it tomorrow. And there was a professional football player here in the United States by the name of Jerry Rice, who used to say, today I will do what others won't, so that tomorrow I can do what others can't. And I think I love that quote, because it's like, today I'm going to do the thing. I'm going to do the hard things. I'm not going to do the easy things. I'm going to do the hard things, because tomorrow, when I do the hard things today, I'm going to be able to do the things you can't, because you didn't do those things yesterday.
That's really, I love that from that perspective, because I'm looking at it going, when you're talking about learning and you're talking about kids there and kids learning, do you think, as an adult, as a kid, when we're a kid, we play. Well, your kids play and we mess up and it's okay. We're having fun when we're playing. Then as an adult, we go through this learning process and we start to think about, what did I do wrong? I messed this up. And that becomes our focus. rather than going, that's a normal process of learning. If you're doing something that you don't have the skill to do it for the first time, for the first many times, you're likely going to mess it up because you just don't have that skill. And that's part of that process. But as an adult, we think, oh, we shouldn't be failing, and we focus on that failure, and then we give up. Do you think that's that process? And is it a case of just being a kid again and allowing ourselves to play?
Yeah, I think it's so many people look at others and say, okay, that person is successful. However you define success, whether it's money, power, prestige, position, whatever you want to call it. And they look at that person and think, wow, I want to be like that. Yeah. But what they don't see, our daughter got my height, unfortunately, and it is 6'2". And I remember all the days being with her in the gym, putting up thousands and thousands and thousands of shots to get good enough to be able to go to college. Well, people see her on the basketball court during a game and say, oh, that kid's great. What you aren't seeing is the hard work, the sweat, the being in that hot, sweaty, humid gym every day for hours, making yourself better. And I remember Kobe Bryant is a basketball player here in the U.S. Who passed away in a helicopter accident a couple years ago. But he was one of the best professional basketball players. And I remember hearing a story about him one time where he went up for a shot and somebody hit him on the elbow and he missed the shot and they lost the game. Yeah. Well, after the game was over, he grabbed one of the managers, went into a practice gym and stayed there and shot that shot and had the manager hit him on the arm every time he shot that shot. How many people would have done that? Yeah. Almost nobody would have done that. But if you want to be great, you need to fail and you need to be good at failing. Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, used to say, I never lose. I either win or I learn. As long as you learn something, you can be whatever you want to be. But when you stop learning, that's where the problem starts.
I do often wonder about that with that what's called natural talent or perceived natural talent. And you mentioned about, Kobe Bryant, your daughter practicing. And I think about things like they talk about, you talk about, say, Beethoven or Mozart, and we go, oh, they accomplished so much. But when you look at their history, I mean, I think it was Beethoven's dad was a violin player or someone of great musical ability who started teaching him as soon as he was able to play, like from a very, very young age. And then we go natural talent. But do you think natural talent is something that's obviously, if you're playing basketball, height's an advantage. That's going to give you an advantage. But as far as skill goes, do you think there is natural talent, or is it more a learned process of repeated behavior, of just continued practice, particularly, I mean, if you're young, but even if you start later, it's that continued practice.
Yeah. I mean, sure. We all are born with certain unique gifts and talents. Absolutely. Maybe I'm a better basketball player just innately than you are. Maybe I'm not. But I think the thing that separates the good from the great is one word, and it's work. Maybe it's two words. It's work ethic. What is your work ethic like? Yeah. I'll tell you another story about Kobe Bryant. People used to say, and I remember doing this, you get up in the morning, you go work out, you come home, you eat breakfast, you rest for a while, then you go back in the afternoon and you work out again, and then you eat, you go to bed, and you do it again. So you work out twice a day. Well, Kobe Bryant figured out that if I go to bed at 8 o'clock at night, I can get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I can get 3 workouts in one day. Now, if you add an extra workout, if you find an extra way to be successful, to do that work every day, where everybody else is only doing 2, just think of the force multiplier on that. Over the course of years, over the course of summers and things like that, how much better you're going to be because you're just practicing more than that person. But again, that's a choice. I want to stay up late and have a good time and go out with my friends, and I'll sleep in, and then I'll start working out at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, and that'll be okay. Sure, it'll be okay if that's what you want. But if you want to be great,
Mm.
that's not going to cut it.
Staying with basketball, Michael Jordan, from what I understand, when he was younger and playing in school, college, I'm not sure the level that you call it in America, but apparently he was cut. The coach said, "Look, you're highly talented, but you're just not putting in enough effort. You're actually not putting in the effort that you need to be on the team." And he was cut. And that really hurt. And he took that away and processed that and then decided to put in the effort. What do you think makes that difference to be? Some people might have gone, okay, I'm cut, and they've gone sulky la la and gave up and complained and blamed the coach and spent the rest of their life in therapy going, my life sucks because the coach wouldn't give me that break. The alternative, the other side of that, or one other side of that, is that Michael Jordan said, okay, I need to put in a bit more effort. What do you think makes the difference between making those decisions?
Yeah, I played against Michael Jordan when I was in college. So, yeah. I think it's again, I go back to, we're all born with certain unique gifts and talents. And there are things that interest us. And for Michael Jordan, he was interested in basketball. And he wasn't willing to just take the and I guess maybe back up. I've seen so many people that started down the road toward a goal, sort of like Jordan. And then they butt up against an impediment. Oh, you're not good enough, or your attitude's bad, or you're not a good teammate, or whatever you want to say. And then we quit. We don't quit. At least here in the United States, we don't quit. We got to blame somebody. We got to find somebody to blame. We got to blame our parents or our station in life or our boss or whatever it is. Very few people take personal responsibility for their own success and happiness. And I think for Jordan, it was, okay, you told me I can't do this. Okay, watch me. Yeah. Watch the time, watch the effort, watch what I'm going to do, to become great. And when I played against Jordan, I was a senior in college. He was a freshman. He was not the Michael Jordan that we all know now, but he was about ready to burst onto the scene with that. And so it was tremendously interesting for me to watch it, because about 20 years later, my youngest brother coached Michael Jordan's two sons when they were in high school. So kind of an interesting, story to say. I played against them. 20 years later, my brother coached his kids.
You touched on a really important point there, which connects with Cher's principles. The first principle is personal responsibility, and you mentioned that because I really want to understand this, what your thoughts are in respect of what makes the difference between someone that will do what Michael Jordan did, say, okay, I've got a knockback. I've been told actually I'm not that great, or not that I'm not that great, that my my attitude isn't that great, and rather than blaming, as you said, or giving up, he's taken that personal responsibility to move forward and adjust to that. How much of that do you think, how do we develop that? I noticed, one of the things I did, and it became a surprise with the corporate work that I did with some of the continuous improvement programs that I had when people had tasks to do, I implement, and I did it for selfish reasons. I didn't want complaints. So I said, and I was in the position to do that. So I said, if you've got a task to do and it's to be done by next time, all you can do is come in and say, I didn't do it. You can't give a reason. You can't explain. You can't give any. It was what I call the no excuse policy that I implemented because I just didn't want to listen to it. So I just said, you're not allowed to give an excuse. Just say you didn't do it, and then we can move on. Efficiency with time, that kind of thing. But what I found is when they couldn't give an excuse, all of a sudden the personal accountability went up. People didn't want to come in and just say, I didn't do it. I didn't get it done. And it was amazing, that shift. And so I'm just wondering from that perspective, how do we make that shift in, because I know from my perspective, my own personal accountability went up. It's because I implemented that in a corporate wise, and that'll work in my life. And some people I've worked with, it works as well. how do we make that shift and going, well, let's cut the excuses out and just say, I didn't do it, and move forward?
I think you set, like you did, I think you set an expectation, and somebody has to set that. I'm not sure, especially when we're young, if that's the case. I mean, Michael Jordan's father was a tremendous influence on him. I would love to talk to him and say, did your dad, when you got cut, did your dad give you some piece of advice or some words of wisdom that sort of lit that fuse for you, that it's like, okay, kind of like with my father. I love my father. I would do anything. I would care for him, as he was dying. Did your dad say something to you? Did your dad do something for you that lit that fuse, that got you going on that? Because, a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. And it takes somebody that we admire, a teacher, a coach, a parent, a relative, somebody to say, you're looking at it this way. What if you looked at it this way? And and that's when the light bulb goes on. You're like, oh, I never thought about that. I never thought that there was a different way. We get so locked into one perspective, and to be open with ourselves and to be honest with ourselves and say, you know what, to own it, to say, yeah, my attitude is terrible. I need to change that. I need to improve that. But we don't do that. And we are so soft. We always want somebody to bail us out. We always want somebody, like you said, you made the environment such that, no, I don't want to hear your excuses. Did you get it done, or did you not get it done? No excuses. So when you create that environment, and a lot of times that environment is created as part of a team. Military teams do that, where, this is the expectation. You didn't get, I don't care why you didn't get it done. You didn't get it done, but that was the expectation. Even for me on basketball teams and things like that, here's what you're expected to do. You have a role to play on this team. You may be the star. You may not be the star. You may be the guy that sets the star up, to score 30 points, but that doesn't make you any less important in that team, because, and so much of our life is team. That's one thing I learned as a basketball player, the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. You realize on a team, whatever that, for me, it was basketball, whatever team you're on, your corporate team, your family team, whatever it is, that if you don't do your job on a team, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, etc. And if you think about it, the biggest team game we all play is this game of life.
And certainly game of life is a team game when you think about it with your family, your wider friends, those kind of things. Let's come back to what you were talking about before. I want to go right back to the start of the conversation where you talked about the manager that was going to implement the beef nuggets.
I know you and I are both thinking the same thing right now. For those
of you who are listening on audio, we're both cracking up, laughing as we're saying that, and I'm controlling. I have to control myself because I'm speaking, but Terry's laughing. He said, "Oh no, it's reminding me of that." We had a show here in Australia, a comedy show called Fast Forward, and they did these comedy skits. And one of them was an advertising agency, an advertising and marketing agency. And one of the characters introduced a new toilet cleaning product called Browno. And it was you have the blue flush. Well, this was a brown flush. And it was like, it's not going to work because it looks like,
Right.
Anyway, so... But I want to come back, but this is what we wanted to address here, because we're talking about the team game, this character, Michael Jordan, again, highly talented, said don't do it. You mentioned when the guy introduced the beef nuggets and said, and he was told, if it, you better make it work. He wasn't told what would happen if he failed, just told you better make it work. And then when it failed, the VP looked at his character and his attitude towards that. How much of that do you think we need to implement as, if we're leaders in our life, is to look at, okay, you tried really hard with that. You drove really hard. Yes, it didn't work, like the Kobe Bryant where he didn't get the shot. And he goes, okay, how do I adjust that? Is that the focus that we need to be having, going, okay, it's more about the character as opposed to the result?
I would say it is, and I'll give you an example. You may have read this book. It's about your neighbor, the All Blacks, the New Zealand national rugby team.
Who are they? I never heard of them.
Okay, good. All right, that's good. There was this. The book I read was called Legacy, and it was one of the most impactful books I've read recently. I have 4 pages of notes, and I got all kinds of notes in the margin of that. But what I found interesting, probably the most successful sports franchise in any sport in any country of all times, when they're looking to bring on a player, somebody new to their organization. I mean, obviously, you got to be good at rugby. I don't know anything about rugby, so I'm not going to try to insult you at all about that at all.
It's American football without all the padding.
Thank you. There you go. You guys are tougher than us. Exactly. But what I found interesting is the 2 things that they look for are, number one, character. What kind of a person are you? How do you react to losing? I mean, do you go home and kick the dog, or, can you learn something from it and things like that? And the other thing was humility. And I think back on my own career when I would go into a job interview, and you would prepare and you try to get as much information as you could, and you wanted to have, or you felt you needed to have all the answers to the questions. And what the All Blacks say is, in that humility piece, is we don't expect you individually to have all the answers, but us collectively, us as a team, will come up and figure out the answer. And I think character and humility are so important, and they're things that we just don't emphasize. I mean, I think they're starting to be emphasized more now, but if you don't grow up in a household with character, where you're held accountable for the things you're supposed to do. I mean, when I was growing up, there were literally only 2 ways to die when I was growing up. One was natural causes. The other was talking back to my parents. So
I think I grew up in that household.
Yeah. I mean, I never got an allowance. I mean, my family looked at it like, look, there's certain things you need to do to be part of this team. You want to earn money? Go shovel snow, go cut grass, go do, things like that. So that shaped my character. And I think it got reinforced when I was in high school. I went to a Catholic high school. Then it got reinforced when I went to college. I went to a military college, and that got reinforced. So character is huge with me. And my wife and I just had this discussion this morning. We don't look at what people say. We look at what people do, because people talk a great game, but do your actions match what you say?
That's really important. I relate to that from the perspective of, with my son, it was always about, from an early age, developing his character. I wasn't too fussed about his academia, because he could always learn something. It doesn't matter. And I guess I'm probably fortunate from that perspective, although my mum did high school when she was a teenager. At 55, she went back to redo high school because she just wanted to. And it was
good for her.
Yeah. And it was like, I want to do that. And that was so, but the point of that was that you can always go and learn something. Character is a little bit, you can adjust your character, but it's rare that happens if it hasn't been developed early. And that was part of my process, was to instill in my son that character traits, and then we can build on the education from there. Is that something that needs to be done at an early age, or do you think people can become aware? And if you haven't grown up with that, that type of environment that develops a good character, what process does a person need to go through to adjust to that?
I was actually reading an article today. Yes, to answer your question, I think character needs to be developed at an early age. I think I think it's sort of like a snowball. It starts out small, but as it rolls downhill, it gets bigger and bigger. I was reading an article today about how you find people with good character, and this person told the story in the article where he went for a job interview, and he was meeting with the CEO of the company. And he said the CEO started out by saying, tell me about what it was like when you were young, your childhood and stuff like that. And he said, I figured it was just an icebreaker, to kind of get the conversation rolling. He said, we spent an hour and a half talking about from birth till I was about 20 years old. He wanted to know what things, what things did my parents teach me? What events occurred in my life that, that got me to this point? And he said, I walked out of the interview thinking, well, you didn't ask me anything about what I'm trying, what I'm being interviewed for. And he said, I eventually took the job and I got to know the CEO. And I asked him, I'm like, why did you spend all that time asking me about my first 20 years of life? Why didn't you ask me about, was I a good accountant or was I a good marketer or whatever? He said, I got plenty of people that'll tell me whether you're a good marketer or whether you're a good fit for our team and stuff like that. He said, what I find is that people's character is developed in that first 20 years. And after that, pretty much their character is not going to change for the rest of their life. So I wanted to know at that point, what events in your life, what people in your life drove you to be the man that you are today. And so I think if you look at that story, I think it's incredibly important for all of us to teach young people to have good character and what it means to have good character, and however you define character, and then to reinforce that, and say, hey, wait a minute, the expectation here is that you did this and you didn't do it. That's not what that's not what our family's about. That's not what our school's about. That's not what our team is about, and things like that. So you know what, you missed that. You better not do that again. And that just develops that character. That gets that small snowball rolling downhill, and now it's bigger. So, when you go to college, when you graduate from college, your character, according to this guy, was almost fully developed. And yeah, you may be able to improve on it over the years, but those first 20 years are just so impactful for kids. And I'm not sure we do a very good job of teaching them what good character is.
So from that perspective of what is character, do you think it's from my perspective, I was looking at that in great detail and looking at a number of things throughout history that create character, or what I perceive to be character, and I put it down to a higher set of principles that we hold ourselves to. It's just because you can do, because I deal with a lot of contracts and things like that, and just because the contract allows you to do that, if you have a higher set of principles, you might look at that and go, well, maybe even though we're allowed to do that, but maybe we shouldn't, because it goes against our higher sense of principles. And I was looking at one of the things that stood out for me was from the medieval times was the Knights Code. And so I rewrote that for gender neutral and for a modern society to go, here's a set of principles to go. And now, obviously, that's my version of that. But do you think that we need to have that as more of a guidance today? Because it seems to be there's a lot of things out there that are saying don't do this, don't do that, but not a lot saying what you can do, unless I'm missing something. Do you think that's the case? And do you think we need to be starting to promote those kind of things?
I do. And here's why I say that. If you look at, New Year's resolutions or goals or things like that, why do so many of those fail? And, I was reading an article that said most 80% of New Year's resolutions have gone by the wayside by the middle of February, which is pretty pathetic if you think about it, but the reason I believe that we don't reach our goals or we don't do our New Year's resolutions is because we don't tie those resolutions or those goals to our values. What are we willing to give our life for? And I don't necessarily mean to die for, but what are you willing to die for? What hill are you willing to die on? What interests you? What is your passion? What is that thing that drives you so much in your life that you're willing to give your life for it, with the understanding that you may never be successful. You may never see success in your lifetime. So what do you value? Is it family? Is it religion? Your creator? Is it pride? Whatever it is that, is it being kind? Is it whatever it is? If you know what your values are, they can act as anchors for your goals or for your resolutions. And you can tie them to something that's immovable, to something that, I know this is so ingrained in me that if anything comes out of this that is not part of that, then I'm not going to do it. That's wrong. That's something I don't believe I should do. That's not something that is of value to me. But so many people, if you ask them, what are your values? I don't know. We don't think about that. We don't talk about that. We don't ask people. And I'm not saying that, your values today are going to be different than tomorrow, but I think they grow. I think they develop. I think they, I talk about my 4 truths. When I first started, there were 3 truths. Well, through education, through learning, through reading. Oh, now I've got another one and things like that. So yes, they can move, they can develop, they can grow. I really think we need to know what our values are before we start talking about, what our goals are and things like that in life. I think we're putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah, it seems to be the case. Do you think, because I'm circling back here now, because we've gone in circles a bit, but I think we're in a spiral, in an upward spiral, I'm going to say. But we're going around and coming back to this confidence thing, because we're talking about why people don't. Well, what I'm trying to understand is why people, or your thoughts on why people don't act. Do you think it comes back to that confidence thing, that they don't believe that that's available to them? And I'm going to link this back to something that happened from when I was younger. I used to do a lot of things. I used to start a lot of things. I didn't finish a lot of things. And I remember my dad saying to me, you don't finish what you start. And then I started to take that on as that was who I was, that I just didn't finish what I started. And then I can't remember exactly when it was a long time ago, I made a reframe and said, well, I start a lot of things, but I also, and I don't finish a lot of what I start, but I've started a mammoth amount of stuff and I've finished some of it. What I finished is actually quite extraordinary as well. And the things that I finished are really extraordinary and they've helped a lot of people. From that gave me a complete reframe of how I perceived myself and actually gave me more confidence. But again, that was my personal responsibility to make that choice. Do you think it is a case where people, I mean, you mentioned before, there's a lot of people just going through life. Do you think it is because that's the belief that they have, that it's not available to them? So they're just going through the motions because they actually don't believe, or they're not aware that there is more available? And how do we change that?
Yeah, I think it is, people don't know what they don't know. And so, they just kind of go through. Nobody's showed them. Nobody's educated them. They haven't learned that. They're not watching things. They're not reading. They're not, nobody in their families telling them that, hey, values are important. What are your values? What is important to you in life? No, I mean, those were never questions that my parents specifically asked me. But my dad and my mom were, when something would happen, they would use it as a learning tool. And I'll give you an example. When I was being recruited to play basketball, I went on a visit to a college. And while I was at the college, they offered me a scholarship to come and play for that school and go to school there. And I was like, great, I'm going to go to school there. It was close to where I was living in Chicago. My parents could come and see me, my friends, my girlfriend, and all that. 2 weeks later, I get a call from them. And they said, that scholarship we offered you? Not sure that we have that scholarship. We'll call you back and let you know. And I'm a 17-year-old kid. I didn't know anything about, what does that mean? Or what do they, okay, fine. Yeah, sure. No problem. And 2 weeks later, they call back and they say, hey, we have the scholarship for you. I said, okay, great. I said, I'm coming to your school. And my dad pulled me aside and he said, what do you think's going on there?
Yeah.
I said, I don't know. And I didn't. I had no idea. He said, I think they found somebody that they wanted more than you, offered them a scholarship. They said no. And so they came back to you with a scholarship. And then he asked me the $1 million question. Do you want to play for somebody that offers you something and then takes it back and then offers it again?
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I had no idea about, character and integrity and things like that. And I said, let me sleep on it. Let me ask. I don't know. I mean, I had a free ride to go to college. College is expensive. I'm like, I don't want to pass this up. I had other opportunities. And so I slept on it and I came back to my dad and I was like, and I was scared. I was like, no, I hear what you're saying. I don't want to play for that coach, because he doesn't have my best interest in mind. It's all about what I can do for him. It's not what he can do for me. So I don't want to play for him. But now I was like, what do I do? Fortunately, I got another scholarship and I ended up going to that military school, which was the best decision I think I made at that point in my life. But if my dad hadn't said anything to me, if my dad hadn't questioned that, if my dad hadn't gotten me to think about character and integrity and offering something to somebody and then taking it back from you, I would have never thought about that. So I think, yes, we need the important people in our lives to take us to task. What do you think about that? What does that mean? How do you want to be involved in this situation? Or do you want to be involved in it? Do you want to say, no, I'm going to cut bait. Those aren't people I want to be associated with. Okay, if you say that, why? What is your reason for that? And that develops character. That develops, here are the qualities in other human beings that mean something to me, and I want to be associated with those individuals.
Yeah, I love that. Is that a case of, because I reference, for those regular listeners, I often reference Crocodile Dundee, and there's the scene where they're talking.
I love Mick.
And yeah, it's not the knife scene, but it's but there's the scene where they're in the cocktail party and talking about a psychiatrist, and she says to him, you probably don't have a psychiatrist at Walkabout Creek to help bring things out in the open. He goes, no, we just have a Wally. If we have a problem, we tell Wally. Wally tells everybody else, no more problem. Do you think that's is that a case of what we just really need to be able to do, is to give ourselves permission to talk about? Because you mentioned about this situation with with the coach, and you rather than trying to solve it yourself, and you mentioned before about working as a team, you have much more strength there. Is that something that we need to develop? Because I feel that there was a push towards you had to be independent, you had to do it yourself. It was all about your own self-resilience. But now we seem to be coming to more of awareness that it's not that's not the best way of dealing with it. It is about discussing things, talking with people about those kind of things. Do you think that's what we need to do to give ourselves that confidence to talk to people about these things and seek that advice?
I think it is. I mean, if you think about, if I didn't know you, and I don't really know you, but if I knew the 5 people that you hung around with the most, I could probably tell you a lot about the type of person that you are. Yes. So think about your inner circle. Think about the people you spend the most time with. Are those people that, care about you, that love you, support you, want the best for you? Or are those people that are constantly having drama go on in their lives, and, they're putting you down, and they're telling you can't do things and stuff like that? If that latter group are the people you're hanging around with, you need to get rid of those people. You need to get it. And I know that's easier said than done, especially if those people are family, but you need to surround yourself with good people with good character, people with integrity, people that are smarter than you. That's their old saying about, if you're the smartest man in the room, you need to find a different room. Yes. Find people that are smarter than you, find people that are better than you, because what that will do it's not going to decrease that it's going to raise you up, because you're going to want to be on that level. Again, I'll go back to basketball. Why do some of these small colleges end up beating some of these great big, state schools with all these great players? And it's because they bring their A game every night, and they got nothing to lose. You know what? I'm going after this team. I'm going to give it everything I have to beat this team. It's not that they're more talented. You play 10 games, you're going to lose 9 of them. But on that one night, where you give it everything you've got, you can be extraordinary. Yeah. But you have to do that. That has to be a habit. It goes back to, motivation, discipline, habits. If you've got motivation, you've got the discipline to implement the good habits, you can do anything in life. If you're missing one of those 3 pieces, awful hard to be successful.
Yeah. How much of that do you think relates to being aware that that's available to you? Because it becomes a circle. Our beliefs create what we see. Our reticular activating system is set by our beliefs, so that filters the information that we take in. Is it a case that we need to create, just have more conversation? That's why I love today's world that we live in, because there's so much information out there. There's so much people sharing good information. Well, good's probably not the right, but information is going to help people and give the ability to say, oh, there's so many more options here. Because I was looking at that, Yeah, even in television. I don't watch a lot of television show, but there's a few things that I watch. And I remember I was coming back to this, that your box cutter friend that you mentioned, back in the day. I was watching the Cobra Kai series just recently, and the Johnny character went through this epiphany where he was doing all these jobs that he hated, but he was actually starting a family. The girl he's with was pregnant, and then through one of the other characters in the show, it says, well, the guy goes, he'd been owning this shop for 20 years. And he goes, I don't love this shop, but it's about my family, which is what you talked about from the very beginning. It was about your family. But I'm liking that going, I saw that then. I was also watching MASH recently, from the long 80s. Now, I watched that as a kid with my dad, but maybe because I was very young and wasn't really paying attention to the context. But I remember an episode when I watched it recently, and there was an episode there where they really got into the nitty-gritty of gender equality. They really, looked at that a lot. Now, that was in the 80s, so that's 40 years ago. And with all the discussion, so that was that was there, and it seems to be people miss that. Do you think it's because we block out through our beliefs and reticular activating system? We've actually blocked out information that's right there in front of us, and we just need to be more aware, more listening to what's going on to be able to see that information?
I think we need to be, you're right, the information's there, but I think we need to be open to it. We need to be, we like being with people that are like us. But we do. I mean, let's face it.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? We create a loop that keeps us where we are.
Exactly. But if you're willing to step outside that, if you're willing to open yourself up and say, oh, okay, I don't know anything about, gay and lesbian issues. I don't know anything about accounting. I don't know anything about whatever. And willing to open yourself up to, as you say, all this information that is out there, you become a more well-rounded individual. But again, that's like, well, wait a minute. If the people I hang around with don't like gay and lesbian people, then, we're not going to talk about that because those people are bad. Those are people. Those are human beings. And one of the things I learned by being a hostage negotiator is the importance of listening. And I'm sure your audience is like, well, of course, you dummy. Listening is very important, but it's not listening to respond. It's listening to understand. And somehow we've gotten to a point in society, I believe, or at least I've seen, where you and I, you might say something, Damien, and I may say, oh, okay, Damien, I may agree with you. I may not agree with you, but help me to understand where you're coming from. That takes a certain amount of confidence. That takes a certain amount of assuredness that, I'm not going to be somehow demeaned by this. I'm going to be educated. I'm going to learn something about that. So help me understand it. That's listening to understand as opposed to listening to respond. But now we're just screaming at each other. And if you're screaming at me and I'm screaming at you, neither one of us can understand what the other one's saying. And then the last thing I'll say about this is somehow we've gotten to a point where if you don't agree with everything that I say, you're a bad person. Like, when the heck did that happen? When the heck did all of a sudden you become bad just because we don't? I mean, think how boring our planet would be if we all thought the same way, we all acted the same way, and we all looked the same way. My God, we'd be boring as hell. I want to be around people that educate me, that push me, that make me a better human being. I don't care what you are or what you do or how you identify. I want to be able to learn. It goes back to what I said earlier. I want to be able to learn from everybody I come in contact with.
I love that. That really sums up what you've said there, is listening to understand as opposed to listening to respond. It's interesting how often that when we're having a conversation with someone, we're so busy thinking about what we're going to say next, as opposed to trying to understand. What do you think it takes from a character perspective or a personality perspective to be able to listen and take that on board, as opposed to being really, it's really defensive. You're being really, if you're sitting there going, no, that's wrong, that's a really defensive posture, which, and if I look at it, and I've got a military background, so I can relate to your the work that you did in SWAT, because I was at the Special Air Service Regiment here in Australia. And part of that defensive posture is actually a really weak posture to take, rather than one of actually being in a position where you can be open to what's coming and the information that's coming, so you can adapt to that. How do we make that character shift to being open to that?
I think it goes back to humility. It goes back to, there's this tendency, I know everything. I got all the answers. I'll be the first person to tell you, I don't have all the answers. And I really believe, nobody becomes successful. Nobody, unless you're a hermit living on a mountain somewhere, in India, we need each other.
Yes.
We grow by the interactions that we have with each other. And sometimes, it goes back to that. Is it nature or nurture? Are we born this way, or is it something that we can learn? I don't think there's too many things that we can't learn. And, and being an SAS member and things like that, what it's like to be part of a team. What it's like to be valued. Hey, you know what? We're in the middle of a combat. I've got an idea. Here's what, nobody's going to be like, hey, Damien, you're an idiot. I don't want to listen to your idea. No, you're part of this group. I want to hear what you have to say. And that's what good leaders do. They bring all different perspectives together, and then they are the people who take that information and are able to pull the trigger. They're not going, well, we need more data. We got to study this to death. We got to, no. All right. I've got all the data I'm going to get right now. I've got to make a decision. And that comes from confidence. That comes from assuredness. That comes from faith that, might not have all the answers, might make a wrong decision, but at least I'm going to make a decision.
Do you think that comes from this attitude of really holding on to that we've actually started to define too broader and too many narrow identities and going, oh, I'm this or I'm that? Because you mentioned about being a person there, and I'm linking this back to the higher set of principles that we have and looking for those commonalities, because I've been fortunate to travel to at least 44 countries around the world. And what I noticed most about that, so many different cultures, so many different ways of doing things. But when I looked at what was there, looked at that higher set of principles, I noticed that people want to enjoy their life. They want good things for their children, and they want to, spend time with friends. That was, happy time with friends. Everywhere I went, that was the case. And a smile was a smile. It didn't matter. A smile was a smile, no matter where I've been. And I just wondered, are we trying to narrow things down to isolate? And I'm trying to think of what you mentioned before about this protective nature that we're having, that it's like, we've got to defend this one little thing, and forgetting the higher principles. Do you think we need to come back to that and just say, hey, I'm a person and you're a person, and we enjoy spending time with our family, friends, and let's have fun?
Yeah, I think we make life way too hard. We are human beings. We are designed to interact with each other. If you put us, by ourselves and leave it, we'll drive ourselves crazy. But yes, I think it's incredibly important to not feel that I can't learn something, like I said, from the guy who's pushing the mop to the guy who's driving the bus to the CEO who's running the company. When sometimes young people reach out to me, not so much anymore, about being in law enforcement, and they'll ask me, what do you think, what should I do to be a good police officer? And I always tell them, put your devices down, go out on the street and talk to the homeless person, and go up to the penthouse and talk to that person. Because if you can communicate with all different forms of people, you will be a good law enforcement officer. If you can't, you're going to be miserable. You're going to be constantly be pulling your hair out. Well, why won't they tell me? Well, you don't know how to talk to people. You don't know how to, I used to drive my wife nuts. We would go to parties for her company. And I would say, okay, I'm going to go into the party now. And when the party's over, I'm going to come back and I'm going to sit in the car. And I'm going to tell you about 5 people at the party, about their entire lives, where they grew up, where they went to school, who they married, what their kids do, everything. And I said, and I will guarantee you, they will not know anything about me. But when you go back to work on Monday, they're going to tell you your husband he's a great guy. I don't know anything about me because I spent the entire party just asking you how excuse me, how and what questions, and I let you be what we all are, narcissistic. We love talking about ourselves. And I just let you talk and talk and talk. So I get in the car and my wife would go nuts. She's like, I can't believe you did that. I'm like, they don't know anything about me.
Yeah.
They never ask me reciprocal questions. Where did you go to school? How did you meet your wife? What do you do for fun? What do your kids do? Where do they go to school? They would never ask me that question. Yeah. But I would ask them because I'm interested. I care about other people. I want to know about them because I can learn from them.
I love that. I link that back to what you started that with was we make life way too hard. I'm a big proponent that life is easy. Life is really easy. And coming back to that point that you just highlighted there, I had some other examples, but your one's better. Well, it's because how many people want to go out, want to make friends, and they don't know how to make friends. But what you highlighted, because you mentioned that you started with talking about going as wanting to be a police officer, go talk to the homeless person, go and talk to, I apologize if I don't know the correct person with a house. Feel free to comment. I won't read it. You can guarantee I won't read it. Something I worked in show business a long time ago. I learned you'd never read your reviews.
Your reviews, yeah. What do critics know anyway, right?
I'm happy to have the conversation. Come and have a conversation. Come and we'll sit and have a coffee here in a cafe in Melbourne if you want to fly that far. Feel free. I'll buy the coffee. But the point is life is simple, and I have a number of examples of relationships and money, but you've added another one here of creating friends. I mean, it's quite easy to be an interesting person. You don't think of all the things to tell them about how wonderful you are. Certainly, and if you're trying to share some experience, I made this mistake myself really badly, where I quoted my CV to show my experience. I looked like a complete twat. But what you talked about there is you went to a party and you said, "I'm going to," It wasn't that you were asking questions about them. The next day, they were talking about what a great person you were. They knew nothing about you, but they remembered that you're a great person because you asked questions. Now, that's not a hard instruction to follow, is it? No. How questions? How did you do that? And how and what questions I think you referenced. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
I did. Yeah. And that's a SWOT thing. That was a negotiating thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's not difficult to do. How do we convince people or show people? Is it because of the sports? I link it to the sports mentality. I'm going to blame Nike. Was it just do it? You got to work hard to succeed. Now, yes, you have to put in effort. Definitely, you have to take action. You have to put effort. But there's hard work and there's smart work. And if you want to, make friends with people, using that as an example, hard work would be trying to think of all the things you're great at and then trying to force that on people and then keep getting knockbacks. Einstein said definition of insanity is you're trying to doing the same thing, expecting a different result. Or you can do smart work, which is your case of, how hard, compare those two. And I know this is a long, I'm exploring, I went off track and I'm exploring something as I'm doing. But how hard is it to think of all these wonderful things and great qualities that you have and keep that as a list and remember all that and remember how to link that to a conversation? Or in your case, you have what and how questions and you're listening to the other person and what school did you go to and what did you like about that school? Which is the most effort and which is going to get the best bang for your buck?
Exactly. And I think part of it, and you're going to blame Nike. I'm going to blame social media because, you and I having a conversation over social media, me texting you or sending you an email, absolutely, that's not communicating. We're not connecting. And I'll give you another story. My daughter she got my height, as I said, and she was recruited to play basketball. And when she made the decision to go to the Air Force Academy, I said, okay, now you need to call these other coaches that were interested in having you come play for them. And you need to tell them that you have made your decision. And she's like, no, I'll just text them. I'm like, oh, no, you won't. There's no way. They have developed, that's a relationship. They were developing a relationship with you. You owe them to get on the phone and call them. She didn't know how to do that. We actually had to role play again, here's what you say, and here's what they're going to say. And then we went back and forth. But the funny thing was the coaches she went to a great academic school, the highest level of college basketball here in the United States. And some of these schools that didn't have as good a basketball and didn't have as good an education, the coaches were mad at her. Yeah. And I'm sitting there and a couple of them yelled at her. And I thought back to my situation that I told you about my dad, when I had the situation when I was recruited to play basketball in college. And I went back to my daughter and I'm like, just like my dad did, what did you learn from that? I don't know. Well, do you think they had your best interest in mind? Oh, maybe not. So we get on these devices and we think we're communicating and we're not. We can't talk to each other unless we do it over a text. And I think that's the other issue, especially in schools here in the United States. All this bullying and cyberbullying where, you and I looking at each other, you would never say to me face to face what some of these kids say to their peers over the internet or on a text message or something like that. It's like, you know what, you wouldn't have the guts to say that to me face to face. Why do you think it's okay to say that to me on a computer? And the second thing I'll say to that is those things only hurt if you take them internally. If you care. I mean, I would get you thrown off the air if I told you all the names that I've been called as a police officer. But none of those hurt me because I could have cared less what that person felt about me. So, those things only hurt if you own them. Don't own all this crap that goes on where people, say bad things about you that, I didn't like your hairstyle or I don't like the clothes you're wearing today. It's like, I'm sorry. I could care less what you think about my hairstyle or what I'm wearing today. That's not important in life.
I love that. Where do you think that came from, and how do we turn that around? Because from my perspective and what I've learned is, and I'm a big study of Wayne Dyer, who was very much, you have an internal candle flame. It's your emotions. No one can make you feel anything. You respond. And from that perspective, you say, what someone says about me is none of my business. I don't care. And that's what I mentioned before. If someone's offended by something, I'll say, look, I'm happy to have the conversation and talk about it. But, if you want to call me a name or something, it's not. And a lot of times, part of my way of addressing that was realizing that people do that for a reaction. So if you're reacting, you're not in control of yourself. They're controlling you. So that was part of the way I got out of that. But how do we, from that perspective, recognize, and is it coming back to personal responsibility, going, it's my emotion. I don't have to react that way. I don't have to even listen to it. I can just move on and stay focused myself. How do we do that?
I think it's incredibly important. And some of it is, I think, first world problems. And I'll give you another story. My brother is the president of a Catholic high school, the Marist Brothers Catholic High School here in Chicago. And the Marist Brothers asked him to go to Guatemala and check out the Marist High School that was up in the mountains. He's like, I don't know, that's a third world country, a lot of issues there. I'm not sure I want to do that. But he ended up going. And he said, I got off the plane at 10 o'clock at night. I walk into the airport. There's all these guards with AK-47s walking around and stuff like that. I'm put into an armored convoy, taken to the Marist compound where I spend the night. The compound's guarded and everything. And he said the next morning I went up into the mountains and I went to the high school and I'm talking to the principal. And I said to the principal, how do you handle, mental illness, bullying, cyberbullying, fighting? And the principal kind of looked at him like, I don't understand your question. Well, how do you deal with students that, have mental illness, that are bullied, that are cyberbullied, that are fighting and all? He's like, we don't have those problems here. He's like, well, you don't? Why? He said, look at these kids. He said, they live in huts with dirt floors and no running water and no heating and air conditioning. They understand that the only way they're going to get out of this abject poverty is to get an education. He said, so they work their butt off here in the morning, at school, and then they spend the afternoons in the fields helping their families, harvest the crops, plant the crops, weed the crops, and things like that. He said, so, bullying, cyberbullying, mental illness, we don't have any of that stuff here because these kids realize this is the only way they can get out of this life.
Yeah. That's really interesting how it puts that perspective in. I mean, and from my experience, because I always think about, whenever I'm worried about stuff, is I think about my grandparents, who they're World War II war refugees from Europe. They came out to Australia, and they, firstly lived separated from each other for, I think, 2 years, while my grandfather built first earned money and then built a 2-room, not 2-bedroom, 2-room hut with a dirt floor. And I think, when I think about the problems that we have, and it's like, well, am I really being overly worried about something that I shouldn't be, and I should focus on what I actually do have as opposed to what I don't have? And do we need to do that? Do we need to, because gratitude has been proven as a way, certainly when you talk about mental illness, to have gratitude and a mental illness at the same time is really difficult. I'm not sure of all the research out there on that, but certainly people who are grateful are less anxious, have less problems, that kind of thing. Is it a case of we need to be starting to promote that more and focus on what we have as opposed to what we don't have?
I think it's incumbent upon us to focus on what we can give. I think if you think about us, and I've really been thinking about this a lot lately. We get out of high school or college or the military or whatever we do, and then we get into life, and we somehow think that we are born empty and that we need to spend our lives filling ourselves up. I got to get a great job. I got to make a lot of money. I got to get a great house. I got to get a great trophy wife. I got to get kids. And we just consume, and we consume all this stuff. And we think that's going to make us happy. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, we find out that it doesn't. And I think what I've been trying to talk about lately is sort of a different way of looking at it. What if we looked at that we were born full? Yeah. And our job was to empty ourselves out to make life better for ourselves, for our family, for our friends, for the people we come in contact with. That's an entirely opposite way of, all the, and again, go back to my marketing days. You need to eat this sandwich. You need to eat this salad. You need to buy our product. That's consuming. That's filling ourselves up. No, you're already filled. What if you empty yourself out for people? And I find when going through cancer, I have bad days. I'm a human being. I get down. I feel sorry for myself. I cry sometimes. But when I do that, I find I'm looking inward. Woe is me. Life is bad. Things are. And I find a way to get out of that is to start to look outward. What can I give? How can I go just say hello to somebody, to have a cup of coffee? Hey, do you want to talk for a few minutes? Now, all of a sudden, the focus is not on me. It's about what I'm doing to make somebody else's life better. And if you think about that, if we could all do that, how much better would our world be?
Do you think that's a separation of who we are as a person to our behaviors? And I'm going to link this back to what the quote that I had at the start of it. In today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. I think it's always been the case. But this, and I'm going to relay that to a friend of mine who used some fairly heavy drugs in his life and, changed his way. And now he's helping a lot of people and doing a lot of things to help people, specifically men in that space. And what he said to me, it surprised me. I didn't realize this, but he said to me, I get such a high today. The high I get from giving is higher than any drug that I've ever taken. Not only that, the giving high doesn't have a downer. It's not like because we have the drug and then you have the downer. He said the giving high is always there. It's always, and I'm always feeling great. Whenever I think about something that I did that helped somebody else, I always feel that, and there is no downer. Do you think it is that? I love what you've said there, that we start full, and it's about putting that out there. Is that, from that side of things, how do we, encourage more people to realize that, and what does a person need to do just to realize that this giving makes a massive difference in your life?
I'm actually just about finished with a book right now called Give and Take. It's written by a man named Adam Grant. And he talks about, givers, takers, and matchers. And, matchers are more quid pro quo. You give me something, I'll give you something. Yeah. Takers are, I'm just going to take stuff from you. And givers are, I'm going to, I'm going to give you of myself. I'm going to give of you. And, a lot of people think that givers are sort of, if you give of yourself, if you're nice, if you're kind, society is going to walk all over you. But what his research has found, and I guess the answer to your question is I'm going to make this more, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to make this more about how it can help you to be a giver if you're a matcher or a taker, because what his research has found is that givers maybe initially get kind of walked on or stepped on or don't get the opportunities, but in the long run, those people are more successful. Those people, because they help other people, and then those people, and I found this when I was a negotiator, if I do something for you, there's just an ingrained thought or idea that I've got to pay that back. You've got to do something, to help me. Most people feel that way. So if you help people, people will want to help you. And then the more people you help, the more people will help you. And eventually you will get to the point where you're now more successful, and they can measure this from a monetary point of view. You're more successful than those people that just give me this. I'm taking this. I'm going to, it's all about me. I want to be successful in life. And so I would say that, yes, we need to promote giving. We need to promote, because it's in our own best interest. You're going to be more successful if you're a giver than you are if you're going to be a matcher or a taker.
I'd be interested to having a look at that first part where you mentioned where you actually suffer a little bit at the start, because from my perspective, I've always been a great giver, but I've never felt that I've suffered because of that, or I had to take a step back. I've actually felt that I've always gained a lot, and there's a number of stories through the podcast I've shared, but I was going to go there, but I'm looking at the time, I've realized how fast we've been enjoying this and gone, oh my God, I haven't got into all your different stuff that we were going to get into. And that's why I'm fascinated. I certainly know from my experience, I've got so much more benefit from giving than the actual giving, and not with the intention of getting something back. It was just naturally. Right. I grew, and I didn't remember this, but I remember my mum telling me ages ago. And I'm one of those people that quote my mum, and I'm quite proud of that. I will promote my mum.
Absolutely.
But I remember she said, I don't remember her saying it as I don't remember her saying, but I remember when she told me about it later. But she said, don't give because you expect something in return. Just give because you want to. And although I don't remember her saying that as a young child, I lived that. So she must have said something along those lines, because that's kind of what I did. I never expected anything in return, but I always got so much more, and monetarily, friendship-wise, all that kind of thing. But I do want to touch on, sorry, we've talked a lot here, and I'd love to have more discussions, but I do want to get into what you're doing now, because you're a motivational speaker, you're an author, and you've got two key topics that you talk about is how to live your uncommon and extraordinary purpose, and also the 4 truths to leading a resilient life. Do you want to explain a little bit about those and the work that you're doing, and where people can reach you? We'll start with what you're doing first, and then we'll get into that other part later.
Sure. So, I sort of divide my time between trying to stay alive, because I have cancerous tumors in my lungs. I had my leg amputated back in 2020 because of the disease and things like that. But what I found, and this goes back to when I was telling you about my father, my father, when he was diagnosed with cancer, had end-stage breast cancer, which for a man back in the 1980s, they had no idea how to treat that. And so they pretty much told him to go home and die. But he lived another 3.5 years, and I believe he did because he was in real estate. He worked up till 2 weeks before he died. And I sort of tucked that in the back of my mind. It's like, you've got to have a purpose. You've got to have something that you're doing. You can't just sit in bed and lay in bed all day and think, oh yeah, I've got cancer, I'm going to die and stuff, because you'll be dead pretty quickly. But if you have a purpose, if you have a focus, you will live longer. And so I saw that in my father, and I've seen that in my own life. And so, my purpose now is to put as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love, and that's not something guys talk about very much. I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about, the love for what you do, the love for other people, caring about other people, giving, as we were talking about earlier. So I found that that's incredibly important, and that's very fulfilling for me. I'm not making a lot of money off of it. As a matter of fact, I'm really not making any money off of it. And I don't really care, because right now for me, it's about what I can give instead of what I can get. So that's what I'm doing. My book was really a book that was born out of conversations I had with people that, were saying, you should write a book, you should write a book. And I was like, no, I'm not writing a book. I'm not an author. But I had 4 months after I had my leg amputated where I literally sat down at the computer every day while I was healing, and I built stories. The book is called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 principles to leading your uncommon and extraordinary life. And I already had the principles. So I used to sit down at the computer every day and build stories. And they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how the book came to be.
Can you give us a snapshot of the book? You've got the 10 principles in there. Give us a snapshot of some of the principles. I'm happy if you want to talk about all of them, or pick a couple of key ones. And
I'll give you, it's fun for me as an author, because whenever somebody reads the book and they reach out, there's always one principle that kind of resonates with them. And the principles are not in any order. Number 1 isn't any more important than number 7. But one of the ones that I like and that resonates with me, and because I've done it so many times in my life and I'm not proud of it, is this: most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And I know I've done that. I know I've wanted to do something and it was like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I'm not smart enough, or maybe I don't have enough information, or what will people say about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. So that's one. I talk about what we had already talked about. There's a chapter in there about the importance of listening, and listening to understand versus listening to respond. There's an entire chapter in there about the importance of failing, and failing often when you're young. That's a chapter. The last chapter, and maybe the last chapter is the most important. It's a chapter about love. It's a chapter about, loving ourselves, loving our creator, loving our fellow man, loving what we do. And I don't think a lot of people do that and understand the importance of love. Most of us were created in love. The only thing that goes, I believe, that goes with us when we die is the love that we have in our hearts.
Yeah, that's wonderful. This created in love, I like that. But what I want to sort of understand is, from those principles, do people come and go, okay, that really stood out, and this is what changed my life from that, or is it, what are the responses that you've got from that?
Yeah. You write a book and you're like, is this any good? And in the United States, there are 800 books published every day. So you don't write a book to make money. You don't write a book to get famous. You write a book. I wrote the book to try to help people. I wrote a book that said, look, I've learned these things. I don't purport to have all the answers, but these things have worked for me. If some of them work for you, then by all means take them and incorporate them, use them in your life. If 1 or 2 work, then take those and develop your other ones, develop your other, and I'll get into that when we talk about the truths here in a minute. But it's people have reached out and said, you just don't know the impact that your life has on people. And I'll give you a quick story. I had a nurse who, when I first met her, was training on the unit that I get my infusions on. She was already a nurse, but she was about 25 years old. And about 6 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she said, Terry, I got a story I want to tell you, but I'm a little uncomfortable. I didn't know how to respond to that. And I'm like, well, it sounds like it might be a good story. I'd like to hear it. She's in and out doing her thing, taking care of me. And 2 hours later, she comes in, she sits down on the bed and she's like, all right, here's the story. She said, when I first met you, I was going to get out of nursing. I'd had a good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my parents. I was going to go to work for Amazon. And she said, and then I met you. And I see what you go through. I went back and I read everything you've been going through these last 11 years. And I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that my life had had an impact the way it did on her. And I really believe, that we sit there and we say, oh, my life sucks, or, if I had this, and you have no idea who's watching you or who's observing you from on far that you don't even know that would give everything they have just to walk in your shoes for 10 minutes. So, the next time you start thinking like, oh, my life sucks, believe me, there's somebody out there that trade places with you like that.
Yeah, very true. That's so very true. From the two topics that you talk about as well, how to live your uncommon and extraordinary purpose. Do you want to tell us a bit about that one?
Yeah, I talk about the two stories that kind of helped me develop the book. And one was about a former player who I coached in high school, who had moved to the area in Colorado where my wife and I live with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner, and did I already tell this story? I'm starting to. Okay, that's
all right.
We've been talking for 2 hours. Have I told you the story already?
Exactly. If I can't remember it, the audience probably can't either. So tell it again.
All right, good. All right, so cut this part out when you do the editing. Cut this out. So I had this player that moved to the area where my wife and I live with her fiance, and the four of us had dinner. And I remember saying to her after dinner, I'm really excited that you're living close, and I can watch you find and live your purpose.
Yeah.
And she got real quiet for a while, and she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents, and living that reason. And I think that if you do that, we all want to be successful in life, but success isn't about, cars or money or power or influence. None of that stuff matters. I'm going to tell you another nursing story. I had a nurse ask me what it was like to have my foot amputated and my leg amputated. And I told her, it certainly hasn't been easy. I'm still learning how to walk again. But what I said to her was, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind. It can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. That's who I am. That's who you are, Damien. That's who everybody who's listening to us is. And we get all excited about, this vessel or this house that houses who we really are. And we spend a lot of time on this. But I think finding our purpose is figuring out and developing our heart, our mind, and our soul.
Is that part of separating who you are from behaviors and as you say, the physical attributes and the physical things you might have?
I think it is. I mean, when I was a policeman, I don't know if you saw this when you were in the SAS, but I saw policemen who were cops for 40 years and couldn't retire because their identities were tied to that gun and that badge and that authority that they had. And they somehow felt that without that they were nothing. And, I never felt that. I mean, I loved being a cop, but it wasn't who I was. It was what I did, and it was what I felt my purpose was at that time in my life. But I walked away from it, after 10 years because my wife who was the primary breadwinner, had to find another job. And so we had to move. So it wasn't who I was, but I think a lot of people get caught up in that, this is who I am. And if I can't step outside that comfort zone, but those are the people that never grow. They never get better because they're so, this is who I am and I identify this way.
Is that part of what you discuss as well? Because you mentioned that was your purpose for those 10 years, but then you moved, and it sounds like it wasn't, a choice in the sense of you decided you wanted to not be a police officer. As you said, your wife was a primary breadwinner. She had to move. So you moved, and then it sounds like you found another purpose from that move. So do you talk about that, about finding purpose and changing purpose?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think we all kind of get to a point where we hope that our purpose in life, lines up with our job or our occupation. And it doesn't have to. Your job could be over here. This is what you do to pay the bills. But, your purpose is to write or to paint or to be a podcast host or whatever it ends up being.
Yeah.
But, you get to a point, I think, and again, it goes back to what I told you about how important family was, what family did for me. And my wife married me when I was a a suit and tie, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, hospital administrator.
Yeah.
And during our marriage, I'm like, hey, honey, I'd like to make this major shift in my life.
Be a police officer.
Yeah, I want to be a police officer. I want to work nights. I want to get shot at. I want to be on SWAT. I want to do all this kind of stuff. You good with that? And she supported me in that.
Yeah.
So when it came time for her to find a new job, it was time for me to support her as well. And hopefully our daughter saw that, how mom and dad supported each other and cared for each other, and that family was more important than what we did for a living.
I'd love to talk about that more. Maybe it's a topic for another podcast about the relationship and how those things work together. I want to come back to what you were talking about, when we're talking about your purpose and linking that to, I'm linking it to self-love and that ability to express love, particularly for guys. I mean, when you're going through that process, because some people, I find it difficult to relate to that because I didn't grow up with that. I didn't have, my life wasn't perfect, and my family, my parents had their issues. But I got a lot of love I feel I got a lot of love, and I certainly felt a lot of love, and certainly between my dad and I, we could express that love, and certainly today, whenever my dad and I see each other, we give each other a big hug, can quite comfortably say I love you in public, no problem with that at all. But how much of that is important, from, having your purpose, being able to go, okay, I love myself, being able to say that, particularly as a guy, being able to say that, and also to be able to express that. Do you find that is a challenge for guys, and how do you overcome that?
I do think it's a challenge for guys. It's not macho. It's not manly,
Yeah.
But I mean, I can sit here and say, well, I kissed my father goodnight every day I was home when I was all the way up till he died.
Yeah.
Until I was in my mid-20s. And so, I played college basketball. I was a SWAT team police officer. I mean, you and I probably are pretty macho guys, and we're very comfortable talking about love and the importance of love in our lives. And again, we're not talking about, romantic kind of love. We're talking about love for self and love for others. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about giving. When you love somebody, you want to give of yourself. You want to help that individual. You want that person to succeed. You want the very best for that individual. And that comes from a state of love. And if you don't love yourself, you can't love other people. And you're not going to be able to love. I mean, you can't really love other people. You can say, hey, I love you and stuff, but it doesn't matter. And it's not the physical act of, as you said, hugging your dad or being able to tell your dad, you loved him in public, or me kissing my dad goodnight, until I was in my mid-20s until he died. Heck, I'm in my 60s. If he's still alive, I'd probably still be doing it, but it's the connection that you have. It's the giving. It's the wanting the best for that individual, even if it means you have to sacrifice something of yourself to make that person, successful, or to get them over the hump to the next life, or whatever it ends up being. It's giving of yourself. That's what love is. It's not holding it close to the vest. It's giving it out, pouring it out for others.
I'm always fascinated by that macho thing because, like you, I mean, I started my career in the military and was posted to the SAS, and we also, trained a lot of the TRG, which is the Australian equivalent of the SWAT that you guys have. Well, it was TRG in Perth, and similar, friends of mine here in Victoria, where I am now, the same group. I actually can't remember what they're called now, but so many guys within there are like, you wouldn't mess with them.
Yeah.
It's like, but the thing is, you wouldn't know it from seeing them in everyday life. I mean, yes, they're physically strong. There's no question about that. They work out, but they're physically strong. But to see them, they're quite calm. They're quite soft-spoken. They're quite, very calm and controlled in their demeanor. But they have a power underneath that. And this is where I was talking, my across the road from me, where I live, is I have some really good neighbors. And I've always seemed to have people in my life, friends that were former pastors, and the old guy across the road, he's a former pastor. And we would talk about, there's a quote in the Bible. I grew up Catholic, but so I have I do reference that.
Me too.
Yeah, yeah, Polish, Ukraine, and Russian. So I can be the peace talker at the moment. I've integrated. Why can't they? Although
Exactly.
I don't think it's the people. I don't. I don't. I think that it's not the people, which is another topic that we could talk about. But what was interesting when we're having this discussion was one of the things that always stood out for me, which I couldn't reconcile having this Catholic upbringing, was the Bible is not really the most friendly thing. It's like, you mess us and we're going to end you. But there was a quote that was, the meek shall inherit the earth. And I couldn't reconcile that. I'm going, how is that? The Bible is saying you mess with us and we're going to slaughter you, basically. The robes are drenched in blood, all that kind of stuff is in there, and saying, the meek are going to inherit the earth. That didn't reconcile for me until later, when I understand from and this is my pastor friend across the road mentioned, we were talking about this and he confirmed it, was that the meek actually comes from a Greek origins, which actually means great power under control. What the original meaning was, a person that is a great warrior, or is good with weapons, that kind of thing. The person that is actually able to control that and deal with things without aggression will inherit the earth. That's what they were referring to. And it's interesting when we come back to that macho thing. It's like guys can't express, and that takes a lot of love, as you mentioned, a lot of giving, a lot of listening. I remember listening, it was Barack Obama, not listening to him, but listening to a show about him. And he would sit listening to another president talk for, an hour, and the other person would just sit there and listen the entire time while that person talked. And how much control, how much strength does that take? To me, that's macho. That's,
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I find that, this perception of macho, it's like when I met people that perceived macho, they don't have a lot of inner character, inner strength. How do we change that, do you think? Do we need to,
Yeah, I think a lot of that goes back to humility. I was just thinking of a quote you said. It was like, okay, of 100 soldiers, 10 shouldn't be there, 80 are targets, 9 do most of the fighting, and 1 is a warrior. And I thought, that's a great quote. But that warrior is just like you said. I don't need validation from you to know that I have this strength. I didn't need anybody to tell me. I mean, when I was a police officer, I was 6'8", 240 pounds. Yeah. I worked out. I was in great shape. People looked at me and I'm like, I used to think, you don't want to try me because you will lose. And things like that. But I didn't need to say that. I didn't need to go around, saying, look at me, I'm tough, I'm strong, and stuff like that. I mean, look at me now. I'm in a wheelchair. I have no leg. But I still believe I am strong internally. I'm strong in faith. I'm strong in giving. I'm strong in love. I'm strong in character. At least I believe that. I mean, I can certainly get better, but it's not this. Again, it goes back to the facade, the outer part. This is all just a shell. Who are you really inside? Your heart, your mind, and your soul. Are you working on those? Are you developing those? Because that's where character comes from. That's where strength comes from. That's where being a warrior comes from.
Yeah, it's interesting how that inner character is what you project. And they talk about that a lot too with self-protection in self-defense courses as well. People that perpetrate these crimes are actually looking for the weaker target but if you project strength, then the chances are that you are not going to be a target because they're just worried that they're going to not succeed in that and they're going to get hurt. Yeah.
Right.
Let's come back to your other talk that you talk about, the 4 truths leading to a resilient life. Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Sure. So the 4 truths are, I have them here on a Post-it note. I see them multiple times, and I have them in my office. So I'm constantly having them reinforced in my brain. And they're just 1 sentence each, and I'll give them to you. So the first one is control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. The second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life, and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. The third one, I look at it more as kind of a legacy truth, and it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I look at those truths and I call them sort of the bedrock of my soul. They're just a good place to start to build a quality life off of.
I love that. And so what are the key takeaways if we're going to, because we've been chatting for a while now, and there's so much stuff that we've covered, and I'm sure there's so much more we can cover, and I'm looking forward to future chats. But if you could sum up, something for the audience to take away, wisdom, key wisdoms, in a nutshell, what would be your key wisdoms that you would say to the audience to take away?
There's so many things I want to tell you. I'll end with this, and it's another story. When I was in college at this military school, one year we had a president by the name of James Stockdale. And Stockdale was the highest ranking prisoner of war at the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War in the 1960s and 1970s. And he organized prisoner resistance. He cut himself with a razor so he couldn't be used for propaganda. He did all this kind of stuff. He was in captivity for 8 years in this horrible environment. And I remember I didn't have a lot of interaction with him, but I remember I was at an event with him once, and somebody asked him, who were the people that survived that brutal, torture and that brutal environment? And he said, well, I can tell you a couple people who weren't, who didn't survive it. He said the big, tough, strong, macho guys that thought that there was no amount of torture that could break them. He said those people did not survive that. He said even the optimists, the people who, we're going to be released by Christmas or by Easter or by Thanksgiving, whatever it was. And then Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter would come and they wouldn't be released and they would die of a broken heart. He said the people that survived that were the people that understood what they could control. And he said the only thing we could control was our breathing and our thoughts. And then controlled it. He said, those are the people that survived that ugliness, that torture, those circumstances. He was locked in leg irons, and he hurt his knee when he ejected from his aircraft, and they would stand on his knee. And this went on for 8 years. So I just want people to understand what you can control in life and can control that. Realize that there's so many things that are outside your control. Don't worry about those things. You can't do anything about them anyway. Yeah. Control what you can, understand what you can control, and control those things. And you'll be somebody, I think, that'll end up being a very resilient individual.
I love that. That's such a golden takeaway. Thank you, Terry, for sharing that with us. Thank you for the conversations. I look forward to future conversations again. But pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks for having me on, David. I enjoyed it as well.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.